What keeps you awake at night?
Sea levels are rising globally.
Fears fueled by horror stories.
Among the worst flu season in a decade, and it hasn't peaked yet.
We all know the atomic bomb is very dangerous.
Another series of deadly terror attacks.
Because you know that thing your brain does in the middle of the night? This crazy thing where it takes a small problem and it just makes it enormous?
So you could start with your introductory. I feel like you've talked about it on the podcast, but you could talk about your MacBook
computer thing.
Bit. Yeah.
Oh yeah, my wonderful MacBook. So my setup as it is right now is sort of inefficient, but I do have two laptops that I use, one for recording and one for calling Olivia on FaceTime.
Which
Please,
don't
read me on Twitter. I know. Okay, I'm working on it. But as it stands right now, this is the best option I have because it gives me the clearest connection and it doesn't interfere with the settings on Audacity, so just leave me alone. Anyhow.
It reminds me of like one of those low budget films where they have like a lot of leftover laptops and they're just like, he's hacking all of the laptops at once. Because like he can't be bothered to just get several monitors. So he's like, I'm going to have several separate laptops to accomplish this task.
Yeah, I'm secretly a hacker. So the MacBook that I use is a model from 2015, and unbeknownst to me, the 2015 model of the MacBook Pro had a universal problem with QA where the wire that connects the logic board to the hard drive is just faulty, and every now and then just won't detect the hard drive. So you get this error message, and so the first time this happened to me, I panicked. I called Apple, they ran me through some fixes, they didn't work. I went into the Genius Bar, and they told me that the solid state had been just fried, and that they couldn't even extract my data from it, which was a bummer and a half, because a new Lightning solid state drive is like $400 if you want them to install it. So I didn't have that money because I was poor as shit, and so I was like, well, I guess I'll wait a little while and buy a full new laptop because $400 is kind of steep. So I did, and that is how I have this second laptop here. We'll fast forward about 3.5 years, and suddenly I had quite a bit of extra income, so I thought, hey, I've got this MacBook that has almost never been used, so I'm gonna go get that fixed now. I charge it, I turn it on, and oh, it works now, like nothing ever happened. Because, of course it does, Apple is a scam. Mm-hmm. So I've been using it for like 6 months, no problem, and then, last night I go to finish up the last finishing touches of this episode, and that error message pops on the screen, man, as if like an omen from hell itself. And I managed to get it working again with a different fix that I found on the good old internet, but I hoped to God it wouldn't do it again. And it did this morning. I was almost in crisis mode, but I managed to get it up and running again. Just one more time is all I ask of this thing before I get it looked at. So, and then Olivia said...
Okay, so I don't understand things, I suppose. So she said, I need somebody to like look at this and fix it. And I said, don't you have a boyfriend that like does computer programming? And she just responds, Olivia, he's does software, not hardware. And I'm like, I don't know. I feel like maybe that's something they might have discussed. And she went, yes, one of the core curricula for a degree in computer science is taking apart and reassembling a 2015 MacBook. And I don't appreciate the sarcasm, but also my B. I don't know.
Yeah. Christian is a computer game science major who just so happens to know how to completely take apart a MacBook.
Fuck off.
So that's my morning. And it's just gonna get worse from here because hi everybody, welcome to Things That Keep Me Up at Night.
Yeah, this is the episode where we talk about computers.
No, unfortunately it's not.
Is it Bezos?
It's not actually. I did a lot of heavy reading and I realized that there were just endless possibilities for corporate greed.
Wow, really? Incredible.
Yeah, I had no idea. I could have talked about Amazon, or I could have talked about Amazon, Or I even could have talked about Amazon. But instead of doing that, and scorching Jeff Bezos' ass like he so truly deserves.
As an aside, as I was editing last week's episode, my absolute hands down favorite moment was when I made a joke about Amazon, and you just lean into your mic with a gravelly voice and go, Bezos. He's your arch nemesis.
He is.
Oh my god, I loved it.
Nemesis is the richest man on earth, so hey, that's something.
Yeah, it was pretty fucking hilarious.
No, I remembered something that I had only experienced kind of in the periphery of my consciousness, and maybe you had the same experience. You can let me know how you experienced this. Something that maybe nobody in my age group knows quite how bad it was or why. Today, I'm going to talk about the BP Gulf of Mexico oil spill on the rig Deepwater Horizon.
Oh no. Oh no.
So tell me in a nutshell what you know about this.
I don't know much about the physical events, but I go to a lot of symposia for like science.
Oh no.
And there was one symposium, it was hosted by UCI, and it's the Microbiome Symposia.
Oh, no.
And they had a researcher from UC Santa Cruz or Santa Barbara, and his specialization is like biological, like petroleum engineering or something along the lines of that. So he had a whole speech about the microbiota of the region around the oil spill.
Right.
And how it was affected by the petroleum spill, which I'm sure I will discuss, which I actually might let you discuss it first before I hit us with that bad news.
It's all bad news. And actually, it's funny, there is so much bad shit about the effects of this spill that I didn't have time to go into it all.
Yeah.
Because I think I was at page 8 by the time I finished with like just the chemical aspect of it. So you can actually field that if you so wish. I'm going to start, though, with a little bit of background about deep water oil drilling, because I did the reading, goddammit, and I am absolutely not wasting those hours of my life.
What is it? What do we always say? I had to read it, and now so do you. I had no choice.
For you guys is that you don't have to read all the shit that I did, and I can just give you the highlights. Because this is not at all a comprehensive, like, lesson in deep water drilling. This is just the stuff that is going to be relevant to the stuff that happens later. So, without further ado...
God, why does sometimes I feel like we open these episodes as if we really truly are, like, Charlie from Always Sunny, where he has, like, all of the, like, strings on the wall and he's, like, manically explaining his point? That's, like, some of these episodes really do feel like that in essence.
Yeah, it's,
Is this one for you?
A little bit. There's so much going on here that, like, it was so hard to like, narrativize this whole thing because it's just a ball of garbage and information, and it's... anyway, okay, so deepwater drilling first. Gotta get that out of the way.
Yep.
So, according to the CIA, whom I only trust for this singular statistic because I'm almost certain that they wouldn't lie about oil usage... The United States goes through about 80 million barrels of oil every day.
Yep.
In case I have to spell that out, that's insane demand. That's demand that's absolutely unsustainable. We just don't have that much fossil fuel left.
Yeah.
But the oil business is a big moneymaker, so oil companies comb the planet to find new oil reserves. And if you're doing the math right now, you're probably realizing, hey, the planet is mostly water, so congrats. Now you know why most of our oil comes from offshore drilling. Mm-hmm. So it's hard enough to drill on land, but to do it offshore in the middle of the ocean is just a whole other thing. Just on its face, you have to drill where there's literally no light, hundreds of feet below the surface of the water, contain both all of the liquid, solid, and gas forms of petroleum, and then transport it back to the surface in such a way that it is easily packageable and then transportable back to land. All of that, ideally, would be done with just the highest order of special equipment and safety protocol. All of it has to work perfectly to succeed and, I don't know, not destroy the oceans and stuff. So that would be done with offshore drilling platforms, which can be attached to the ocean floor, or just be an artificial island, or it can be a free-floating little buoy thing. I say little, it's huge, depending on the need. They are fucking enormous. I can't overstate that. They are both a rig itself and then also housing quarters for thousands of employees that have to make the thing run. Some look just straight up like floating cities. Others are actually production facilities that are above floating undersea towers that can reach depths of 4,000 feet. Yeah, that's
kind of cool.
Isn't it kind of dope? Like,
It's like that's kind of like sci-fi-esque.
yeah, it's like it is an upside down submerged tower that is taller than literally any skyscraper on Earth. That's dope as shit. Also kind of terrifying and dystopian, but that aside, that's not what we're talking about today. So, once an oil company has a reason to suspect that a petroleum deposit is in a particular place, they lease the land, ocean or otherwise, from the nation that owns it. In this case, the land was U.S. owned, but that's neither here nor there. So then...
What land that has oil isn't U.S. owned?
Oh.
Like, you know what I mean? It's either the
boy.
U.S. or the Middle East. It's about it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Oh, God. Okay, anyway. So they send an exploratory rig to make up to 4 exploratory wells at the potential reserve site. They basically take a cross-section of the rock on the ocean floor and then look for what they call a show, or the telltale signs of petroleum. So that can take anywhere from 60 to 90 days. Mm-hmm. If and when they finally find a show, they stop drilling, test the petroleum for quality and quantity, and then, once they've gotten enough information, then it's time to start actually digging. So, a more permanent offshore drilling platform is built with an intended stay of 10 to 20 years, which is about how long it takes for your average petroleum reserve to stop being profitable. Hmm. So the actual drilling process itself is incredibly boring and technical, but I'm going to do my best for everyone's general knowledge. Basically, and I mean very, very, very basically, the drill site and the platform are connected by what's called a subsea drilling template to ensure accurate drilling. So basically, it's just a metal box with holes in it to reflect the locations of drilling sites based on the topography of the ocean floor. I'm relying so heavily on the How Stuff Works site. And they called it the same reason you'd use a template for a jack-o'-lantern. That's kind of the same idea.
Damn, I fucking love whenever you use very strange, niche but accurate representation. They're like, now this might sound complicated, but we're familiar with jack-o'-lantern templates, right? And you're like, yes. And
they're shit, yeah, man.
Yeah, they're like, just let that resonate with you, and it's
thing.
about the same thing.
Yeah, same thing, except in the middle of the ocean.
Do you think if they had the ability, they would actually make it jack-o'-lantern shaped, or do you think they're trying to go for
I feel like perhaps it's more of a matter of accuracy, but hey, maybe some of them get whimsical with it. You don't know.
It's just one crazy billionaire with syphilis that's like, they all need to have jack-o'-lantern faces, and they're like, he owns
my
the
subsea
company.
drilling template will be put on gourds, god damn it. Oh, God. So the drill itself is basically just a bunch of 30-foot drill pipes screwed together, which they refer to as a drill string, and then it, drills and stuff. So
Thank you, Brooke.
Yeah, this is the technical tour. It can take weeks or months to reach an oil deposit, so sometimes the drill heads have to be replaced, which is a huge pain in the ass, apparently. The drill head, as it gets deeper into the earth, workers send what is called drilling mud, which is a mixture of clay, water, barite, and chemicals into the drill bit, and then that stuff flows back up to the platform, they filter it, and then they start again. So the idea is that the mud will lubricate the drill bit, capture rock shards from the actual drilling, and then also protect against high pressure from the upward flowing oil and gases, etc.
Okay.
Right, so there's always a risk of blowout, so that's cool. So oil companies created this thing called a BOP, or Blowout Prevention System.
I'm sorry.
Which actually spells out BPS, but, who am I? An oil baron? Nah. So, the general idea is that the BOP, it's used if the pressurized oil and gas start gushing up the well will be sealed by hydraulic valves and rams, and then the fluid will be rerouted for containment. That sounds great in theory.
Yes.
Yeah. Then, when the drill finally does hit petroleum, a production casing seals off the well, and then engineers send explosives down to perforate the production casing so that petroleum can escape into the well slowly rather than all at once. Which I'm sure there's more to it than that, but that sounds really, really risky to me.
Yeah.
But hey, what do I know?
You're not a petroleum engineer.
I sure am not. So what rises to the top from there is a mixture of crude oil, natural gas, water, and sediments. So the oil is then refined either onshore or at sea, and then on converted tanker ships, and then sent for further refinement later. That's the gist, even though there are tons of different types of rigs, different processes, more details, and all that, but these are the basics that we need to generally understand what happened on the Deepwater Horizon on April 20th of 2010.
Damn, 2010?
Yeah, not as long ago as I would have liked.
Yeah.
It feels a lot longer ago. Still almost a decade at this point. So,
woof.
Yeah, right. I'm going to take it step by step from here and focus on what physically happened on the day of the disaster, and then I'm going to tell you why it happened, and then the real fun part, which is what happened after the fact.
No.
So, the Deepwater Horizon was an oil rig owned and operated by a drilling company called Transocean and leased by BP. Which for all my visual recognition people who for some reason don't know who BP is, that's the gas company that owns the gas stations. The little green sun looking thing. Yeah. That's what BP is.
Do you want to know what's really funny? The only reason I remember BP at all is because when I was like 10, there was a gasoline video game on like Miniclip. And it was like a game where you had to like refuel people's cars with natural gas. And it was sponsored and designed by the engineers from BP. And I don't know, I guess in my mind, I had this idea that BP was like an environmentally conscious like company.
That's how they want to sell it.
Yeah.
Like, if you look at their website, which I did, they're very, like, look how ecologically conscious we are. And it's like, fuck off, you guys. Like, you'll get it. Anyway.
Yeah.
So, any gas company, any oil company that's trying to, like, claim that they're environmentally conscious or that they work for the environment is lying. They're lying. So, moving on. It was about 10 years old. The Deepwater Horizon was about 10 years old at the time of the incident. And it was drilling an exploratory well about 41 miles off the coast of Louisiana in the Macondo Prospect in the Gulf of Mexico.
Okay.
At about 9:45 a.m. Central Time, a plume of natural gas blasted through a concrete core used to seal the well for later use, rose up the drilling riser and into the drilling rig, ignited, and exploded the platform. The initial explosion killed 11 people and injured 17 more, and the platform finally capsized on the morning of April 22nd. And then that, in turn, ruptured the riser that had been sending drilling mud into the well. Without the drilling mud to counteract the oil and natural gases pressure, the contents of the well just began spilling into the Gulf. Unrestrained. So, that's it. That is the event. That's all of it.
Oh man, we're only 18 minutes in, so
I know.
This is gonna be bad.
Yeah, you bet. So, how could something like that happen? That is the first question. Mm-hmm. I did talk about the safeguards of deepwater drilling. Pretty quickly, it was revealed via WikiLeaks that BP had had a similar incident with another oil rig in the Caspian Sea in 2008. That rig's concrete core also ruptured, and it was found that both of the cores had the same structural integrity issue. Mm-hmm. Both were far too weak to withstand the high pressure of the gases and oil, because both had been composed with a concrete compound that had used nitrogen gas to accelerate the cooling process.
No!
Uh-oh! So they were weakened, they broke, and this happened. Even worse, remember the BOP that I talked about earlier? Like 5 minutes ago?
Yeah.
surprising literally no one, BP's BOP malfunctioned, basically. The blind shear rams that would have cut off the flow of oil went off sooner than expected and punctured the pipe. Literal worst case scenario.
Oh.
So, thus began the circus of corporate cover-up.
Oh no.
After the spill, BP published findings that estimated about 1,000 barrels of oil were spilling into the Gulf per day. That's pretty bad, right?
Oh, that's a lot.
Yeah, so shortly thereafter, the Flow Rate Technical Group of the United States government published their own findings. How much oil do you think they found was surging into the Gulf of Mexico every single day?
I'm going to say 10,000.
This time it is my turn to say, you are adorable. We think that it peaked at more than 62,000 barrels per day, but that it could have been as high as 146,000 barrels per day.
Oh my god, that's...
So much. That is so much. It was overwhelming. It was by far the worst oil leak in history, period.
Oh my
Bar
god.
none. So BP, of course, challenged that number, claiming that the government was inflating the estimate, but, internal emails released in 2013 showed that BP's own research reflected the same numbers as the flow rate technical groups.
Oh.
That the employees that had collected the data had shared the information with their supervisors, but that BP had continued to push the lower number in the press.
Oh my god.
Yeah, you're gonna want to burn this company to the ground.
Okay.
It's bad news. It gets much, much worse. So, bad enough was the cumulative barrels spreading into the Gulf, and I want you to guess how much, like, the end total was, the estimate.
I'm gonna say 1 million.
4.9 million barrels.
Oh my god.
Yeah, but no one could actually figure out how to contain the leak.
Yeah.
Which I remember from when I was a kid. I remember that was a huge deal, that it was like, well, oil's still pouring into the Gulf and we don't know what to do. And that was
cat
like...
litter? No? Anybody? You just
Duct
cut
tape.
to me just like pouring over like fresh sip cat litter. I'm like, this has gotta do something.
I don't know what it is, but it should work, right? No, you just like put chewing gum in the cracks of the
Duct tape.
dome.
Duct
Duct tape, yeah.
Yeah.
So, in May, they actually tried to put a dome over the largest part of the leak, which I think is
fuck off.
fucking hysterical.
That's fucking hilarious. We'll just put like essentially a cup over it.
Yes!
Like a spider that's loose in your kitchen, just put a mug over the top, wait for your boyfriend to get home and kill it. We're just gonna put the
Deal
dome
with it.
over the top.
Man. Yeah, so that didn't work because, as it so happens, the gas hydrates from the natural gases interacting with cold ocean water made the dome completely buoyant. So
That's fucking hilarious. They just put it under there, they secure it, and it just floats up.
whoop, yep, right to the top. So then they tried pumping drilling mud into the well to staunch the flow of oil, which also didn't work. BP eventually had some success with siphoning the leak while it was in progress, and then they installed a new BOP, and finally they fully sealed the well. But remember, this happened in April. It wasn't fully sealed until September.
Whoa!
Yeah.
What
And
the fuck?
Yeah, and then by then, only 800,000 of the 4.9 million barrels of oil had actually been successfully collected.
Oh my god.
So, what do we do with the millions of barrels of oil still in the Gulf?
Push it somewhere else.
You know, it's funny you say that because you're not actually that far off.
Yay!
Do you know what they did?
Push it somewhere else.
Okay, so I'm going to take that as a no. When the oil started to make landfall on the coasts of Louisiana and Florida and Alabama, etc.
Oh no, not white areas of the world.
Oh no! Well, that was when people started manually removing oil. That's when you saw, like, Dawn dish soap advertising.
Also, can we just fuck off Dawn dish soap? Like, I understand, like, it was insanely beneficial for, like, the organisms to be, like, washed off,
and
but they're
stuff.
like, wait, Steve, an opportunity. and they just, like, rebranded themselves as the oil-saving conglomerate.
Yeah, that's it.
Fuck off.
It's like, yeah, it worked, but man, anyway, so that was that period of time where people were manually removing the oil from the shores. Some of it was removed via controlled burn. Most of it, however, was quote-unquote removed via what BP and the media simply called a dispersant. So, I did quite a bit of reading on this, and I am actually horrified by the lack of just specificity on what this substance actually did. Mm-hmm. So, like, I was on Encyclopedia Britannica, I was on the Smithsonian site, which was the worst offender of all, period. And, like, all of them were like, yeah, they used a dispersant, and it worked. Thanks, BP. And I'm like, you're being paid off. Like, that's what's happening here, because it is a fucking nightmare scenario.
Oh my god.
Some of them just claimed that it makes it, the chemical, the dispersant, makes it easier for bacteria to digest the oil so that it metabolizes faster. Mm-hmm. Some made no claims at all, other than to insinuate that it worked. But I got the full truth, and man, is it fucking awful. And I want to thank two especially helpful pieces of info. There's an article written by Mark Hertzgaard, and then there's a site called the Government Accountability Project. Without these two pieces of information, I would have never been able to find anything about this. Wikipedia actually had way more information about this than any of, like, the quote reputable sources that you're, like, supposed to use. Man. It's insane. So, the dispersant's brand name is called Core Exit. Have you ever heard of this?
No, I have not, no.
Cool. Prepare to be fucking horrified.
Oh, no.
So, what its actual goal was to break down the oil into tiny, tiny droplets before it reached shorelines, which would disperse the oil all throughout the Gulf. In other words, make it so tiny that no one notices it. Which, like, is not as bad as it sounds in theory, but that was the extent of the information that was given, and that was purposeful. They were branding it like Dawn dish soap, and I'm not joking, that's the language they used. They were saying that this stuff was as harmless as Dawn dish soap, and basically did the same thing that Dawn does to your grease in your kitchen. So, it worked. The Core Exit was straight up a PR stunt, and it worked. All of a sudden, once Core Exit was out in the world, media outlets began reporting that the oil spill hadn't actually been all that bad. The New York Times actually reported that Rush Limbaugh, resident intellectual, had a point when he said that the news media had exaggerated the devastation of this oil spill, which is insane. But I digress. Then, a whistleblower protection group called the Government Accountability Project received a technical manual from a company called Nalco, which was the firm that had supplied BP with Core Exit in the first place.
Okay.
The manual prompted the GAP to create a report that lasted from 2011 to 2013, in which they interviewed dozens of whistleblowers with first-hand experience with the Core Exit and crude oil combination.
Okay.
What they found was that when BP initially brought forward the idea of using Core Exit on the spill, scientists at the Louisiana Environmental Action Network immediately voiced concern. One chemist in particular, her name is Wilma Subra, was the champion against the use of Core Exit, listing the potential risks in the combination of crude oil and Core Exit. And I'm going to read it, quote, "The short-term health symptoms include acute respiratory problems, skin rashes, cardiovascular impacts, gastrointestinal impacts, and short-term loss of memory. Long-term impacts include cancer, decreased lung function, liver damage, and kidney damage."
Whew, okay. Well, from what that suggests to me is that it's probably a powder, because it's a surfactant, because it's, like, essentially, it's dish soaping the oils.
Right.
So if it's a surfactant that powerful, in a powderized form. If there's any inhalation, I mean, it's a powder. If there's any ingestion, your body is made up of lipids, which I'm sure it's acting as a surfactant on the lipids in your body. And if there's cancer in the kidneys, that means its clearing rate is pretty awful. And if it's affecting your brain and nervous system is mostly fat. So it's essentially degrading your body from the inside by acting as a surfactant on the oils in your body.
And thank you for that vivid image of exactly what it did.
Yes, thank you.
But Wilma Supra isn't just a chemist, though. I want to like hone in on this for a second. She won a goddamn genius grant from the MacArthur Foundation for her research in environmental pollution.
Jesus Christ.
BP,
how can we trust her, though?
Right? Come on. What is she? She's just a woman.
What a fucking narc.
So BP ignored her.
Ugh.
They also ignored the director of the EPA at the time, Lisa Jackson, who asked BP to consider a, quote, less toxic dispersant than Corexit. Because Corexit had been approved for spills in the past, however, by the government, BP wrote back with a declaration of Corexit's harmlessness, and then 19 months later, a study found that not only is Corexit toxic to humans, which we have discussed, it also becomes over 50 times more harmful when mixed with crude oil.
Wonderful, wonderful.
So, let's tally the score so far. BP is directly responsible for shoddy craftsmanship of a cement core that bursts and causes the largest oil leak known to man, which dumps millions of barrels of oil into the Gulf of Mexico.
Okay.
They lie about the amount of oil leaking into their ocean by a measure of tens of thousands of barrels, fail at their cleanup attempts spectacularly.
Wonderful.
And then turn to a highly toxic chemical to disperse the oil. They claim that this chemical is harmless against the advice of numerous scientists who know their shit, and then pump over 1 million gallons of it into the ocean because they really didn't have a plan of action for a leak of that size. Are we all following it so far?
I have it written on the board. I have the tallies.
Great.
What
Do you
now?
have the little red strings?
No, I could get that out. I think it's all kind of intertangled. Whenever you store yarn, it never really, stores
true.
well.
If you don't store it in the skein, it just doesn't make sense, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, next time I'll buy some more at the grocery store later. So, moving forward, do we have feelings about this so far?
Rage, to politely put it. I have a lot of feelings right now that I'm sure we'll unpack later.
Great. So, the GAP also found that BP knew of the health dangers before the scientists ever approached them.
Good.
To specify, BP was using 2 types of Corexit. The first, called Corexit EC9527A, and Corexit EC9500A. Now, remember the manual I mentioned? Mm-hmm. Turns out that manual pretty clearly outlines the toxicity of both of those chemicals, and it isn't fun. So, Corexit, EC9527A, which was the primary chemical BP used, is by far the most toxic.
Awesome!
Yeah, that's the one they use the most of, so... The manual says that EC9527A is, and I'm going to quote the HertzGuard article here directly, I quote, an eye and skin irritant. Repeated or excessive exposure may cause injury to red blood cells, kidney, or the liver. Then the manual adds, excessive exposure may cause central nervous system effects, nausea, vomiting, anesthetic, or narcotic effects. It advises, do not get in eyes, on skin, or on clothing, and wear suitable protective clothing. The warning on EC9500A says, do not get in eyes, on skin, or on clothing, avoid breathing vapor, and wear suitable protective clothing. Now, it is a U.S. law that workers working with hazardous chemicals have to be informed of the risk posed by any chemicals they'll be handling.
Yep.
But I ask you this, did BP give out those warnings, Olivia?
I'm gonna say by your tone, no.
Of course not! In fact, based on the interviews with those who worked in Gulf cleanup, BP actually asked Nalco to stop providing the manuals when they delivered Corexit to cleanup sites. Worse than that, most of the Corexit used was deposited via airdrop and was released right over the fishing boats doing manual cleanup.
Oh my god.
Some fishermen reported that they'd been hit in the face by the drops.
No!
Yeah. And then when they asked BP representatives to provide air masks or respirators, the representative told them to, and I quote, deal with it or be relieved of their duties because safety equipment didn't look good in the media.
Wow, that's, straight up evil.
Straight up evil. And I have
That's
to,
straight up evil.
It's so easy to put a corporate face on this. Like, you think BP and you're like, this is a corporate entity, but this is a human person. A human person boated out to the oil spill site, saw that people were getting contaminated with this very highly toxic chemical, got a complaint about it, and told them to just deal with it or they could leave. And I have, I'm not one for moral absolutism all that often, but this right here is a waste of a human life.
Yeah.
Like, this is right up there with I was just following orders. Like, how can you justify this? How do you sleep at night? I hope this person hears this. Like, I want to know. Tweet me, random BP representative. How the hell do you sleep at night knowing that you straight up were killing people? That's just my question. I have many feelings, so...
So many feelings.
So, yeah, safety equipment didn't look good on the media. They had already touted that Corexit was completely safe. That was a lie, and so to give workers protective equipment would make them look like, liars. So we couldn't have that. But it wasn't just the people in the boats that were suffering. The people on site were not the only victims of Corexit. People who lived on the coast also were suffering. One woman says that her 2-year-old grandson became chronically ill.
No.
Always suffering from headaches, respiratory infections, earaches, and on and on. He was actually hospitalized during a friend's birthday party, and what the lady says is that he would go to doctors, and they would treat the symptoms because they're not toxicologists.
Yeah.
Yep, and that was it. And ultimately, they found that BP's use of Corexit was much, much worse than the initial oil spill for both human life and the environment at large.
Oh.
Surprise.
Okay.
So,
Jesus.
Yeah, that's an understatement. So eventually, the GAP and BP held a meeting in which the GAP hoped to get BP to commit to stop using Corexit in the future, and to pay the medical expenses of those who were exposed to it. Oh my God. During the meeting, BP opened with a list of the wonderful progress things that they were doing to make to clean the oil spill, and then refused to listen to the GAP's evidence of poisoning and human rights violations, and then refused to meet either of the GAP's goals. They would not stop using Corexit. In fact, the verbiage just, fried me. The representative said that, because Corexit has been approved by the U.S. government in the past, we will feel free to use it in the future.
Oh my God. I have feelings of violence.
Yeah, I don't understand how you become so shitty.
This is when my father usually says, I hope these people get cancer and die.
My God!
But I mean...
Ron!
Is Ron incorrect?
Jesus, I mean, I don't know.
We're bordering on me feeling like... No.
Well, see, and this is where I run towards what we talked about in your episode.
Yeah.
Just a glass of Corexit. How about you take a bath in this, my friend? If it's the same as Dawn soap, whatever. Shouldn't be a problem, huh? Yeah. And then they also refused to pay any of the medical expenses of the people who had been poisoned.
Right off.
Right,
Fuck right
yeah.
off. I hate you. I hate you all. I hope you die.
I thought you were
I hope
talking
you
to
die
me.
a slow and painful death. I hope your wife leaves you with your children.
Fucking Christ. Actually, same. So, the real kicker here is that nothing changed. We are here 9 years in the future and no new practices have been adopted. No laws have been passed in response to the oil spill. No restrictions in place to make sure that nothing like this ever happens again. No restrictions on core exit. Not even really any news coverage on core exit. The Gulf has oil, and America wants oil as cheaply as it can get it.
The Gulf still has oil in it?
Oh, yeah. Oh, no. I mean, like, the Gulf of Mexico has oil reserves that we can get.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
And the Gulf, like, most likely will always have residue for a long time as far as, like, the spill is concerned. But the company that once called Core Exit as harmless as dish soap has had a cumulative financial penalty of about $54 billion in civil and federal litigation, which is a lot of money.
Not enough.
Not enough, because I want to point
enough.
out that they continue to do business. They continue to tout themselves as an environmentally conscious company. They turn a profit and clearly had the money to spend. No charges against any person involved has accumulated in a prison sentence, and the highest penalty any one person paid was not even a BP employee, but an employee of the cement core manufacturer called Halliburton, and he received 1 year probation.
Fuck off. Fuck off.
Meanwhile, we are still reaping the consequences of BP's gross negligence and active destruction of our environment. 9 years later, we are seeing mass deaths of dolphin populations, which was this year. We saw that this year. And massively decreased lifespans of larger deep-water animals like the sea turtles and the whales, which makes me very upset.
Oh, my heart. I'm getting heart pains.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's just the surface of it. We can't even actually measure the coral reef loss. We can't see that, right? Like, we can measure as well as we can, but we will never know the extent to which this has just destroyed that environment. And not only that, but those who worked with the oil cleanup crews and Core Exit continue to have unreimbursed medical issues to this day.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you mentioned that you went to a symposium about this. I don't know if you have anything to add to the ecological effects of this garbage.
Well, I have much to add. So, two, like, major things that, like, fucking really infuriate me is this aggressively negative stance towards any sort of biological engineering.
Right, yes.
So I remember when this had come out, there have been engineered bacteria that break down petroleum into less toxic byproducts. That they were like, we can mass inject it into these oil deposits and it will eat at some of the oil. And
oh yeah, I'm pretty sure there was like a Russian science group that did exactly that, and it did more than any of this other stuff had done.
yeah, and so I remember it came out, and, like, it's very effective, and it's literally the most biologically conscious thing that we could have done in this situation. But because people are so adamantly against genetic engineering, they're like, whoa. What happens if we just release bacteria into the water and then just opt for literally toxic surfactant? Like, I cannot put into words how unbelievably frustrated I am with people opting for more toxic chemicals because in their mind they think genetic engineering is worse. Like, I can't...
I don't think they understand that this chemical fucks with your genetic material. Like,
forever.
On a cellular level, you are different now. So, like... oh no, we've genetically modified bacteria. What a disaster. I'd rather get cancer, I guess. And part of the problem is that they don't know that that's what it's going to do, because everybody in the news was like, yeah, it's as safe as Dawn dish soap. And that's all they knew.
Yeah. And it just, there's so many like advances in biotechnology. I feel like that would have been such a more effective means of controlling the spill, but that's like a whole nother episode where I can yell about people's like adverse reactions to genetic engineering being the result of financing from these exact same oil companies trying to convince you otherwise. But again, another episode.
Lobbyists.
Lobbyists. So when I was at the symposia, it was 2016, I went.
Okay.
So that is 6 years after the oil spill. Yes. So what the scientists discuss is like one of the reasons that you haven't heard about it is because on a surface level, you cannot see the oil anymore. On a surface level, everything that floated to the surface was treated by these dispersants, which I'm sure he just didn't even get into for legal reasons.
Yeah. That's the other thing is that BP systematically suppressed all commentary from scientists. In fact, I believe they sued several scientists that spoke out.
Yes.
Like early on. So, yeah. They can ruin your fucking life.
Yeah, and also, unfortunately, a large amount of scientific funding is either from the government or from, like, fuel-related industries, and this was a scientist who seemed like he was specializing in research in, like, petroleum engineering and, like, fuel, so if that is the case, you're really not going to want to piss off both the fuel companies and then the government that is being paid off by said fuel companies. But his biggest concern is that the density of the ocean water, because it's so, like, highly, the salinity is so high.
Right.
The oil has been trapped at the bottom of the ocean in, like, a massive bubble.
Oh, boy.
So you can't see it anymore, but...
Which means, obviously, that it's not there.
Yeah, right? And so he said if you go to the ocean, it's just this thick layer of oil dissolved, like in this big, murky, thick layer. That's, like, I don't remember the exact number. It was also 2016. It's not like a teeny little pocket. Like, it's a massive area covering this, like, the floor of the ocean, and it won't rise to the top. He's like, so you're not going to see it. And his job was researching the effect on the microbiome populations in said areas now that there's these toxic pockets of oil, right? So that was his biggest concern, is that, if you interrupt this formation, you potentially risk it coming back to the surface again. But also, it can't just sit there, and because we're not specifically targeting it because it's been pushed somewhere else, in my words, not his, it's not going to go away.
Oh, yeah.
They were doing surface level treatment of that dispersant, like they were just dropping it on the surface of the ocean,
right.
Which is why all the surface oil is gone, quote unquote gone, but all of the stuff that's beneath the ocean is still there. And I don't know what developments he's made. From my feeling about the presentation, it seemed like he knew a lot more about it than he could do about it, because, he had been suggesting the use of those oil-eating bacteria. There were a couple people in the audience that were like, well, we're concerned about the long-term effects of putting bacteria in the ocean. And I wanted to lose my mind. And I believe it's still there. If you look it up, I believe it's still being trapped by the density of the ocean water at the bottom.
Because the dispersant doesn't actually make it go away. Like,
No.
It doesn't dissolve it in the way that one would think. It just makes the particles smaller, right?
Yeah, like soap, the reason why soap works is essentially soap is consisting of... think of it, you remember when we were like in school and we saw the cell walls, the lipid bilayers, you have the little heads and you have the dangly little tails.
Yeah.
So you have the hydrophilic heads. Think of like little sperms, because it's kind of what it looks like.
Yeah.
You have a hydrophilic head that likes water, and then you have the little tail that hates water. So a surfactant, when you add it to a solution of oil and water, it essentially creates what's called like a micelle. And it puts all the heads on the outside and the tails on the inside and creates these tiny little particles of oil within water, right? So that's what like an emulsion is. If you think like salad dressing, you just have these little particles of oil within these amphiphilic little head systems. So that's essentially what they were doing, is they were putting these little micelles into the environment and emulsifying the oil into smaller particles. Now, an eventual result, and this is actually what I'm researching in my lab, an eventual result of most micelle emulsions is they're stable for a period of time and then they break apart and release. So even if it's dispersing it, eventually the micelle is going to break apart and the oil is going to be re-released, which is going to be even more and more of a factor if you go from an area that has a really high surfactant concentration. Which is what it is. It's not a dispersant, right, it's a surfactant, but it sounds less scary if you say dispersant. So essentially you're just making an emulsion, so fancy salad dressing, that disperses over the ocean and at some part re-releases the oil and just literally puts it somewhere else. Unless you have any sort of treatment plan that's geared at, essentially emulsifying it and removing that emulsion, which I don't even think is possible to do at that large of a scale.
No.
You're not doing anything, you're just moving it. The reason why it's been helpful with animals is because you're rinsing them and then you take that oil contaminated wash and then you treat it. You can't do that with the ocean. So to my knowledge, and I'm not a petroleum engineer, I've never had any interest in going into any kind of fuel engineering.
Right.
Breaking down petroleum is very difficult, and I don't believe there's many natural processes that are capable of doing that, hence why there's a giant pocket of oil still on the floor of the ocean as we speak.
Right. And eventually this will just be a problem that we have to deal with again. But because we don't have to deal with it right now,
then it's fine.
Yeah, it's fine. Who needs to look out for the future? That's my children's problem.
And I just wish that they could just fucking inject the oil-eating bacteria, and the system is so targeted where it would truly be focusing on petroleum, the oil. I think there are arguments, they're what if it starts digesting other oils? It's no, these bacteria have been specifically bred and engineered to only break apart the specific type of chemical. But that's going to require a whole lot of lobbying and then dealing with the fact that this isn't resolved, which I'm sure they don't want to talk about.
Yeah, the last thing BP wants right now is for someone to say, hey, this problem is ongoing and is going to get a lot worse, we need to solve it. Because that insinuates that BP pushed it under the rug.
Yeah, or pushed it, as to say, underneath the ocean.
Apt, Olivia.
Yeah, and unfortunately the area that is rich with oil has, I don't want to say permanently, but really has had a lasting effect on the microbiota of the Gulf. And there's certain bacteria that'll grow in response and certain bacteria that'll die, which microbiota are so insanely important for the little minutia, something as simple as they've done research on the microbiota of rats, and in rats grown in environments with no exposure to bacteria whatsoever that don't have a microbiota, that are then re-exposed later in life, have a greater difficulty at respiring and absorbing oxygen in their lungs than those that had been introduced to a microbiome from birth. And so, not to carry over that point entirely, but these marine animals are insanely dependent upon the symbiotic relationships between the naturally occurring bacteria and their environment. So even if they're not swimming in that area, if you have animals that are being born in that environment that don't have the same microbiome as their parents, that are arguably more adapted to their environment and potentially the rate of diffusion of oxygen within their lungs or gills, depending. This goes beyond just the regional area.
Right.
This extends to any animal that has either been born here, has been raised here, has experienced these waters, because then they migrate out. And then if you have a population of turtles that don't have the identical microbiome as their parents, because if you recall, turtles are born on the sand and then go to the ocean.
Yes.
If they're born on the sand, then go into this ocean, which is wildly lacking in bacteria, then they migrate out to different areas and they literally do not have the microbiome that a turtle's born in other areas would have.
And they just die.
and then they either die or then their offspring have difficulty then being exposed to their microbiota, which it's all very precarious. And I don't imagine that the mass deaths of dolphins and turtles and whales are all in some way affected by the fact that this is a very important region of the globe for their breeding and raising of young, because it's a warm, less deep area of land,
right?
Water, I guess. So
it's wild to me because this is all absolutely true, and then the oil itself, never mind mixed with core eggs, it had its own effects just on the actual wildlife. Mm-hmm. So I know that fishermen were pulling up shrimp with no eyes. Not even no eyes, but sockets. They just didn't have eye sockets, period.
Yeah.
Which was, kind of weird.
Yeah.
And they were seeing, crab offspring with crazy defects that they had just never seen before, and fishermen were pulling up fewer and fewer, hauls over time. And it's funny, Barack Obama himself served seafood from the Gulf at his birthday dinner to prove to everyone that it was safe to eat, which is just why? What's the angle there?
And it's that's one of those things where, maybe if they do tests, I don't believe it's, the animals themselves have, petroleum coursing through their veins.
No, and obviously not.
But if there's these deformities, then obviously there's something wrong with their genetic makeup and their reproduction. And, man, this is causing clearly some effects genetically that are then passed on to young if they even live long enough to reproduce.
Right.
And not to mention how many marine organisms are dependent upon a protective lipid layer. That's what blows my fucking mind about the surfactant, dispersant, whatever you wish to call it, is with these bacteria, it would have been a targeted breakdown of specifically petroleum and petroleum byproduct. Yep. But with a mass surfactant, any oil that it comes into contact with, period, whether it's your cell walls, whether it's actual petroleum, whether it's the protective oils that are on most marine species, it's going to dissolve it
down,
right?
For sure.
So, you and I have both had fish, of how incredibly important it is for them to have that slimy external layer that protects them from disease and shit. Mm-hmm. That's gone.
Yeah.
It's
imagine if our mucous membranes were just removed.
Yeah, it's just, that's not, and then,
you can't do it, yeah.
And not to discredit, how impactful, long-term and permanently this is on, human beings. If shrimp don't have eyes or eye sockets, I can't imagine what kind of impact this is having with, employees that had it, literally hit on their face.
So, I'm actually going to end on a story about one of them.
Oh, man.
Her name is Jamie Griffin, and she was a BP contractor who worked on one of the floating hotels and barges that a lot of the cleanup crew were living on.
Yeah.
So she worked cooking, cleaning, and washing for spill cleanup workers. Mm-hmm. While she worked for BP for 6 months, she washed all of the workers' contaminated work clothes and mopped the floors that had been slicked with the core exit and oil mixture, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
According to her own testimony and interviews, she attempted to clean those chemicals from the floor with boiling water, pine sol, bleach, and Dawn, but nothing would even come close to breaking it down. Eventually, as she did this, a blend of the chemicals that she used splashed on her arms and face, and a few days later, she said that her throat, and I quote, felt like there were razor blades in it, and she started developing constant headaches and started coughing up blood.
No! Dislike.
Yeah, just a hard dislike. That is my cat playing with the little door thing. Hello, Quiche. Okay.
Quiche, we need you.
That is my boy. He's my orange boy named Quiche. He's the love of my life. back to the bads, Quiche. Alright, so, unsurprisingly, her symptoms mirrored those of everyone who had come into contact with the blend of core exit and crude oil. By July, she had developed muscle spasms so strong that her fingers had curled in on themselves and couldn't actually be moved anymore. And then a month after that, she had almost completely lost her short-term memory to the point where she, a professional cook for 10 years, forgot how to make vegetable soup. In an interview, she describes how she got in her car to go to work, and then she found that she had forgotten to put on pants.
I hate this. Because what this sounds like is we have, like, fatty deposits all over our, like, nervous, like, system that accelerates the rate in which we can, like, relay signals. Mm-hmm. That's all based off of, like, lipids, right? Yeah. So if you're inhaling it, you're consuming it, whatever, it's literally breaking down your body's ability to operate its nervous system properly.
Exactly. Eventually, the entire right side of her body, and I'm quoting this from her exactly, started acting crazy. It felt like the nerves were coming out of my skin. It was so painful. My right leg swelled. My ankle would get as wide as my calf. My skin got incredibly itchy. There was one doctor who apparently treated 113 other patients with the same symptoms, all of whom had come into contact with the core exit and crude oil. And with so many victims, BP eventually paid a settlement of $7.8 billion, and that's going to barely scratch the surface of paying for their medical expenses, if it pays for anything at all.
Yeah. Jesus.
This is a life that she is still alive, just to clarify, because I think I made it sound like maybe she had died. She hasn't, and she actually works now as like an advocate for the people who had come into contact with these chemicals, which is very cool, but very few of them have received anything close to compensation for what they went through. And they probably won't, ever.
And if it is the case that it is non-biodegradable, non-metabolizable, right, it means this exposure is there forever until you die.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to understate, like, if you've been exposed to it, if you're having problems with your kidneys, if you're having cancer in your kidneys, it means that it's been collected by your renal system and is trying to be flushed, but cannot because it's lipid soluble, I suppose, and your body is unable to clear it.
Yeah, yeah.
So these people are literally never going to get better.
Yeah, a lot of them have very, very permanent symptoms, and most of them, it's funny, because there was that settlement made, and one of the lawyers that was working with these people, or no, one of the doctors that was working with these people was talking about how many of the symptoms are sort of non-specific. So, like, there's headaches, there's the short-term memory loss, there's fatigue, there's body pain, because a lot of them have just musculoskeletal pain. A lot of those symptoms aren't covered by the litigation that BP paid for.
How convenient.
Right? Isn't that just great? So those people who have those non-specific symptoms get nothing. And they have it forever.
Fury. So much rage.
And that's that, because there's no resolution. Much like yours, this is how it is for now. Until something happens, and it breaks bad in the Gulf of Mexico. But this is it. Hate. Sorry, pals.
Hate.
Yeah,
Bezos.
It's Bezos. It's not even Bezos this time. Yeah, this guy, when this whole thing happened, I'm pretty sure the CEO either stepped down or was removed, and then this new guy got, like, catapulted into, like, the CEO's chair. And I remember reading about his reaction to all this, and he cried. He was like, "I just want my life back." And I'm just like, who the fuck are you? Oh man, I couldn't believe the audacity to, like, you want your life back? I'm sorry? People are dying, sir. Yeah, his name is Bob Dudley. He's still the CEO.
Dudley.
Yeah, he's the sitting CEO of BP still. And we hate Bob Dudley. He's the fucking worst.
Dudley.
Fucking Dudley.
Oh my god. Well, do you want to start with what keeps you up at night about this?
Oh, so much. I mean, the whole thing. But I think the thing that haunts me, truly, is that I remember this happening. I was young, obviously, like younger than I am now, but like old enough to be sort of aware of what was going on-ish.
Yeah.
And I know that there were so many adults in my life and people in the news media and teachers, and no one knew what core exit was going to do. Nobody even knew the name of the shit. They just knew a dispersant was being released into the ocean and that it was going to take care of the problem. And that was exactly what BP wanted, was for people to think, this is safe, this is the best case scenario, we are solving the problem, buy more oil from us. And it worked. They had to pay a financial penalty for what they did, but it was, not pennies, but it certainly wasn't enough to sink them, right? And no one went to jail, they didn't have any, like, restrictions put on them after that. It was just, I mean, the company's net worth is $131.4 billion.
Yeah.
Like, this, and they pay for a lot of our government as it stands today. It was never going to happen that any real consequences came of this. And they were allowed, in fact, encouraged to cover this up. And no one knew. Until years later, no one knew what happened.
I can't get over the fact that they blamed the concrete guy. Fuck you.
Well, yeah, and like, I know BP, when they went to court, they named both the people who made the core, so Halliburton, and then also the people who leased the oil rig, which I think was Transocean. And they were like, they're at least partially responsible. And the American government actually agreed and said that they were partially responsible. Transocean and Halliburton, in response, said that BP was entirely to blame and that they had nothing to do with it. But yeah.
Who knows?
It was just, they completely gaslit an entire subsection of people who were dying actively. And then just said that it wasn't happening, and people bought it. That terrifies me, because, like, you can't trust anything at that point. Anything anyone says. Like, if you have enough money, it's fair game to lie. And that's horrifying. Not to get real grim dark.
God, what keeps me up at night? So I might have mentioned that one of the I've always loved nuclear engineering.
Yes.
And I've been a big proponent of nuclear energy for a very long time. And the argument I always run into people with is the one of like, well, if something goes wrong, then it pollutes everything, which is not untrue. And if you've seen the Chernobyl series, which, by the way...
Not yet, but I want to.
Please fucking do.
Oh my god, it looks so good.
I in no way want to discount what happens in a nightmare scenario for anything. Sure. But... something that always blows my mind, and this is something I learned about in a documentary, is that oil companies and coal companies have spent collectively billions of dollars to endorse the use of alternative energy because they know that when the alternative energy is not available, so like let's say you have a wind farm and there's no wind, you're going to need to use a backup source. So these coal and gas and oil companies have spent cajillions of dollars endorsing alternative energy because they know that as an alternative, you're going to use them.
Right.
So essentially, you're optimizing a system that still requires a backup energy source. And to date, nuclear power is statistically the cleanest source of energy that exists if you count casualties and environmental impacts, even with the 3 disasters that have occurred, right? And
you can't walk in Chernobyl, but yeah.
You can't walk in a lot of the area of Ukraine as a result. But also, like, this is comparable. Like, this is what blows my mind. Like, this is there forever, has affected the lives of thousands, if not more, because we haven't studied it.
Right.
Is still actively there, just like radioactive waste is still actively there.
Yes.
Has affected the environment, has led to the like death of thousands, if not tens and hundreds of thousands of species. Like, it's the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, you know,
Well, and,
I think it's
even worse. I think something that I didn't add because I thought I'd be strapped for time. I think the thing that is so weird about the similarities, I would arguably call this scenario worse than, let's say, Chernobyl, because I know that, you know, the initial deaths as a result of Chernobyl was relatively low, but
it was
then
like
of course
30 people.
Right,
Yeah.
and then of course you have to measure how many deaths or illnesses were as a result, you know,
of reduced
widespread.
lifespan, which
Sure,
they
reduced
don't
life-
count towards the official death count, which is
so
a whole other thing for
stupid.
another day.
Yeah. And then, you know, continuing on, the changes in the genetic makeup of the people who were living there,
Yep.
then, you know, their offspring, and so on and so forth. The same thing happened on a much wider scale near the spill site, where they saw parents having, you know, dementia at ages like 40, and then they had
Yeah.
kids, and then those kids had higher rates of just random nose and ear bleeds,
And
whatever,
cancer.
and cancer and asthma, etc. And they were seeing illnesses spread out over time, and it's still happening. And
Because it's still in the water.
right, it's still in the water. It's, you know, most likely just part of these people's genome now, right? Like,
Yeah.
the parents who inhaled this stuff have it forever.
Yeah.
And, like, yeah, it's the same. And nobody is actually talking about it anymore, so it doesn't matter. But, like, we're also seeing mental illness, like, spikes in the areas where that was inhaled. And it's just crazy to me that people think that the Chernobyl disaster was worse than this.
Yeah.
It isn't. I fully believe that
Yeah.
the BP oil spill was far worse than any sort of nuclear meltdown that we've seen.
Yeah. And you know what's almost insane to me is, like, you know, and obviously it was the result of international outcry and great concern, and if they didn't lock down the plant as soon as they did, it would have been far, far, far worse. And if you watch the whole series, it explains it all. It's like, the Chernobyl disaster was devastating, and it's actually something I'd love to talk about in a
Right.
podcast episode in the future.
Oh, yeah.
To this day, there are areas of land that people can't inhabit, and that's what I think is crucial to me, is that as a result of international outcry and concern for human lives and the ecosystem surrounding it, you are not allowed to live in concerningly dangerous areas of land, and it is being treated and monitored regularly to this day.
Right.
And I don't think they ever advised anyone living anywhere near the Gulf of Mexico that this should be a concern for them.
Right, because that would look bad in the press.
Right? And it's I don't know, man. It just, like, really blows my mind. This is a directly comparable, like, example of what could go wrong in,
Well,
you know, oil drilling.
The problem is that I read in a different document that apparently BP and a lot of other oil companies just don't have a worst case scenario, like, plan, because it's a legal obligation that these companies have to have sort of a protocol for if something like this happens. But it's like they're checking off a box. I'm pretty sure that it said that the plan that BP had in place for something of this magnitude was like the same plan that they used in the 80s for a different oil spill of like an eighth of the magnitude.
Yeah.
And because it was there on paper, that's all they needed. By law, that was enough. And they just weren't they weren't operating with safety in mind, because the idea was, well, if something happens, we'll just pretend it didn't.
And you know, it's also so very interesting. I'd say a large majority of the alternative energy sources and nuclear energy sources exist and are regulated and run in the first world. Right. Because, especially with nuclear power, it's such a precarious system to set up, and there's so many highly educated people involved in it, and, not to discount how many scientists and engineers are involved in non-renewable sources, but something that was touched upon in a lot of the readings I've had is with coal and oil, at the very least, it's very easy to outsource the labor. So that's one of the reasons that people don't really think about the impact is think about how much of our coal comes from South America and how much of our oil comes from not, I guess, as much anymore, but the Middle East.
Right.
Right. We just push it somewhere else. We don't worry about the Chilean miners. We don't worry about the devastating environmental impact of the oil companies and the coal companies that are currently having on the people surrounding them until it happens here. Right. And then you have, I forget where it is. I think it's somewhere on the East Coast. They started a natural oil facility, and now you can light the tap water on fire in the surrounding area.
Oh, boy.
And it's methane, and even as a scientist, I can say if you pour a glass of water and you wait, methane is so volatile, it'll escape from the water. Still not safe. Still should be treated. But now we care. Because it's here.
It's here, right.
And, now we care about the fact that black lung is often considered a predisposed health condition when you apply for insurance.
Oh, my God.
Because it happens here. But, currently, actively, there are, probably tens of, if not hundreds of thousands of people being directly impacted by coal and oil mining, just where we can't see it, so we don't care.
Right. Yeah.
Right? And then the moment it happens nearby, which obviously has been the case with the 3 nuclear disasters we've had, because they're generally systems that are set up with a fuckload of money and engineering and education available to monitor it. We're whoa, energy resourcing can have impacts.
What?
And that's what keeps me up at night, is it really just comes down to, again, us not caring about not white people, because there have been oil spills, and there's been there's literally when you set up a coal plant, the water in the surrounding area becomes acidic and eats through pipes.
Whoa,
and we just don't care until it happens to us. It affects us.
And then it's whoa, we can't have that.
I think the biggest contributors to pollution currently are all coal and oil. So
I would tend to agree with you.
And then we don't even have time to get into solar and battery systems being made with non-renewable toxic metals that are being developed and manufactured in China, so that we don't have to deal with the actual implications of manufacturing said devices, because we don't have the time. But
God, I feel we say that every episode.
Listen, man, become our patrons, give us money, and we will continue to pump out these episodes for you. Yes. But yeah, that's what keeps me up. Just power in general really keeps me up at night, because a lot of our opinions on power have been the effect of millions, if not billions of dollars of brainwashing over our entire life about what we believe to be the best energy source. And as a result, there's not been enough engineering placed in renewable energy sources, and unfortunately we're very lagging in that department, and as a result do still have to depend on non-renewable energy sources, and are giving money to companies that make the claim that creating non-renewable energy sources managed by a very small set of companies still maintains competition in a marketplace, which is patently untrue, because I can't decide to not purchase from BP if my state, my city, whatever, is deciding to purchase from BP. It's a fallacy.
Living in LA, you have the option of a few different companies, but that does not account for the small towns that have exactly one gas station.
Yeah. Also, just even think water companies who pump it's the LA Department of Water and Power. That's it. That's all you got.
Yep.
Right. And if you don't like that something's polluted, then I don't know, stop fucking paying for water.
I guess. Yeah.
And then there's no real need to clean water if we can just buy water bottles or Brita systems, which I use religiously in LA County. So anyway, here's our fun show where we talk about fun things. This was a really good episode, Brooke.
Thank
this was
you.
Well done.
It's so bad.
It's so bad. It's all actively currently bad. And I'm sure that we're going to get some tweets where people are going to be like, we just need to make everything solar and wind power. And I'm going to lose my fucking mind because that's not how that fucking works. Because we need to store the energy in batteries, which requires us to build more batteries.
Woo!
Which, another episode.
We're
Olivia
educating
yells
the
about
masses.
batteries for like 25 minutes.
We're educating the masses, 200 people at a time.
Everything is pointless and we're all doomed to die.
Don't say that, even though it's true.
Yeah. So
Thanks, Sky.
I'm gonna actually post on our like thing though. I think I sent you a couple days ago. It was like good news about the environment. And, like, there are good things that are happening. They've designed robots that are, like, repopulating coral reef systems.
Oh, I saw that, yes.
Yeah, and it's... We focus a lot on the bad news, and in fact, I would like to argue sometimes we don't focus enough because I didn't even know that this was a thing until you told me, and it Yeah.
If nothing else, this podcast has made me much more woke.
I hate you.
As the kids say.
I hate you so much.
But it is helpful to know, what's going on, and I can't wait for Matt. Olivia's dear boyfriend is going to come on our show and talk about something.
Yes, his is, it's sad. He's so much visceral rage. Do we know what we're doing after this?
Oh, geez, no. We'll talk about it. It's fine.
We'll figure it. That's going to be an off-podcast conversation that you guys won't be privy to.
Behind the scenes.
We could do another vote.
Oh, hell yeah. Let's do that.
We haven't done that in a while, so we'll do that. Sick.
Awesome.
I'll do that soon because I need to start sooner rather than later.
Most likely. Thank you for listening to my ranting about oil and shit. We have
social media.
So we're at ttkmeup on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We have a website that is ttkmeup.com. We have links on that site to all of our social media and also our Patreon. We have 6 patrons, and we get messages now on Patreon.
Yeah,
thanks, Alice.
It's great.
We made a mistake last time and assumed that Alice was talking about buying Nazi knives from Amazon. We weren't. I still hate them, so whatever.
Yep.
And then
she was looking at other stuff to clarify. Alice is a good. She's not.
Yeah, she wasn't looking for Nazi knives.
Collection.
Yeah. Yeah, and then we also have links to our merch store through TeePublic. We have shirts and mugs and pillows and like those big old wall tapestry things. All sorts of stuff. Fun for the whole family. And then we also have an email address. This is dumb. We have an email. It's ttkmeup@gmail.com. We take submissions for whenever we do Campfire Horror Stories, which is whenever we damn well feel like it. And what else? That might be all of them. Please leave a review on iTunes if you can spare the few minutes. We really like reading them, and it makes us feel good. Unless you have mean things to say, which so far we've been lucky about. Everybody knows that it will hurt my feelings.
Yes. I like to imagine that somebody's listening and they're about to write a negative review and they're like,
shit.
oh, I don't want to hurt her feelings.
Bad.
I don't want to ruin her whole ass day.
Leaving a negative review after listening to a podcast episode from beginning to end is like finishing your meal and then asking for a refund. If you're
Seriously.
here, please don't. Like, ow.
Yeah, I do. We always enjoy constructive feedback and stuff.
Yes.
We've taken much, and I like improving and growing. And
Absolutely.
I feel like always very I don't want it to seem like you cannot tell us if hey, you're really close to the mic and it kind of sounds like ASMR because I edited the episode. I fucking know, but let me know.
Yeah, tell me if you hate it. If we sound like just grating fingernails on a chalkboard.
If in my feelings, I feel like I sound like a man. And Brooke feels like she sounds like a 12-year-old. So please don't point that part out, though.
That's what I'm sensitive about.
I feel like we don't have any more news and updates.
No, I don't think so. I think we're doing okay, just chugging along. We have a mini-sode next week, which we still haven't decided on.
Oh, yeah.
We should probably look at our calendar that we have.
that I haven't filled out. Yeah.
We're on top of it, guys. Thanks
We're
for
doing
putting up with this. We love you so much.
We love you all so much. It's been real.
Sure has.
Bye.
See ya. Whew.
What a van, what a van, what a van, what a mighty good van sales. Can I help you?
Yes, we're looking for a van.
Any special features?
Child locks.
We don't want to lose anyone.
No windows.
That's for privacy.
And no carpet or seats.
We want to be able to hose it out.
Roomy.
There's going to be a lot of moving around in there.
Alright, what's this van gonna be used for, ladies?
Like everybody else, we're doing a podcast. I'm Jennifer Sandwich.
I'm Mel's Bells.
And I'm a not culpable Acadia Einstein.
We're the hosts of Yikes, Murder and Stuff, a not safe for work podcast where every week we'll bring you stories of true murder, international crimes, and abnormal psychology.
If that sounds like something you're into, then put your headphones on and hop in our nondescript windowless van and come see the puppies. YikesMurderAndStuff.com or wherever you listen to podcasts.
And it's safe for work if you work at a construction site.
Oh, God.